Hello, guys. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the Goodliving podcast. I'm your host, Boy, and this is the final monologue of season one of the Goodliving podcast. Well, excited to be here, but let's not dwell on that. This video is for you. You can skip it, but I advise you not to. If it wasn't a video that I think would be useful for everybody that is going to sit down and watch it, then I wouldn't tell you otherwise. So, the topic today is depression, and for a long time, I've wanted to say something about depression, but I just feared that I didn't have enough knowledge. And I also had, people recommend that topic to me. But as we all know, depression is a very, very tricky thing as young adults, especially in this country, especially in this part of the world. It is something that we've all gone through. That's why I say this for everybody. When you grow up in this country, the transition from childhood to adulthood, it comes with you like a smack. I don't think any of us were really ready for the fullness of the responsibilities that adulthood brings. And in my case, and in the case of those people that I know, it was like a few years ago, we were children, we were in school, you were in uni, you were being provided for to some degree. And it just switched up to the point where you are needed to provide. You have responsibility to provide and to deliver as an adult. And it is not something that we're prepared for. Nobody ever held us down and put us in class. In all the education that we had, in all our upbringing, in churches that we went to and in the mosque and everything, nobody really taught you that this is adulthood. And this particular point, I'm going to use it further down this episode to explain a point. Now, when all these things happen to you, it is easy for you to slip into depression. And depression is the darkest of all energies. It saps your energy, it destroys your will to complete certain basic tasks in your life. It even jeopardizes your will to live. And it is the darkest energy, it is the darkest mood or emotion that anybody can be in. And when you're depressed, you feel genuinely like everything is going against you. You're convinced that there is no way out of it. It genuinely feels like there is no way out of it. And it's a mental problem, right? You're facing your real life issues of having to deliver day in, day out in your job, to your family, to your relationship and your partner. And you also have this battle in your head mentally. There's a sickness in there that you cannot quite talk about because it is just the nature of depression to be extremely evil. It isolates its cause, it isolates its victim, and that's how it is able to be successful in being able to wrap around your psyche in a way that causes you to be depressed. But today, luckily, I think I have found with some research something that might be helpful for us in dealing with depression. But we need to understand that it's a normal emotion. Like I said, everybody feels it. Everybody has come across adulthood, that has seen life as it is in its full form and gone through different levels of trauma, has experienced depression at one point or the other, especially if you're old enough. And so it is not an emotion that we should hype. We should give it its respect, but it's not something we should fear and hype and shy away from, as is the natural feeling of everybody, or for the most of us, and majority of the time. That's how we like to deal with depression. And over time, I've had this idea on how to deal with depression. 3 months ago, if you had taught me and asked me how do you handle depression, I had what I thought was a foolproof, fail-safe method of handling depression that keeps you alive and stops you from being depressed. But when I went further down into research and to see what psychologists and philosophers had to say about depression, I learned something new entirely. It was completely different, and I feel like that pattern is more helpful. But let me go first straight to my own pattern because it has helped me as well. Now, first of all, I believe depression is just a simple human emotion that you feel like every other human emotion, like happiness, like sadness, like frustration and anger. And you can snap out of it. It is a thing of mood, it's a thing of trigger and effect, or cause and effect. Something will happen that will make you angry and then you can calm down. Something will happen that will make you sad and then you can move on. And I feel like that is how it happens. Something happened that will make you depressed and then you can also snap out of it. And my method was, if you find yourself feeling depressed and empty and, in that state, the way to tackle it is first not believe in it as a long clinical illness, a clinical problem, as it is often seen as, people like to diagnose it, give you medicine, antidepressants and stuff. And I'm directly, completely against that method, even until now, with the new knowledge that I've learned. And I believe that what you should do when you're depressed is physical activity that is productive. So, for example, here I am in my house recording this podcast. I feel good when I'm doing this. And if, for example, I had slipped into a depressive episode earlier today, picking up my camera and shooting this episode now is something that uplifts my mood and makes my day better at the end of the day. And if that's the case, then it's a cure to a certain degree to depression. Also, doing physical exercise. I said this in an episode, Gym Culture, earlier, that exercise, the way it moves your body, regulates the internal part of your body and also your psyche. It improves your general health and your well-being and even the mental state that you leave the exercise with. I had a story about when I recently got out of a relationship earlier when I was in uni. And I felt that I was depressed. I think that was the first time I actually felt depression come to me. And my friend invited me to come play ball with him. And when I went and I played football, I felt a lot better. Probably it didn't cure the whole thing, I don't even think it did. But in those moments, just after the exercise, in the few hours after that, I felt a certain level of energy. And it is probably my responsibility to have used that energy into something else so that I would escape my depression completely. But I didn't, and I slipped back into it and I had to, go through the whole motions before I got out of it eventually. But that was my way, yeah, that was my modus operandi, MO. So this is my pattern. My pattern also involves dealing with the cause of your depression directly. So if you lost a partner, maybe somebody broke up with you, if you got that partner back, you probably won't be as depressed anymore. If you lost a job and you got another job, so if you focus your energy on productive activities like getting another job when the loss of your previous job made you depressed, then you have purpose, and with purpose you can break out of depression. So these are the things I feel you can do to get yourself out of depression. But what about depression that is caused by things that you cannot necessarily fix? One of the characteristics of depression is that it isolates its victim. So there is breakup, there is the loss of a job, actually, there is loss of contract, there is loss of family member, bereavement. Now, in the case of bereavement, how exactly do you slip out of depression? You really can't, because you would mean bringing the person back to life. And the trauma suffered is the trauma suffered. You cannot really unbreak your head. Simply because you have urgent medical health care waiting for you after hitting hammer on your head doesn't mean you can unbreak your head. So the trauma has been dealt already, the blow has been dealt, and it is now for you to deal with it. And in those situations, my pattern does not help. So we are going to go to people that I researched. One of those people is Frederick Henry Amiel or somebody, in a book called Amiel's Journal that he wrote. He says, "You desire to know the art of living, my friend. It is contained in one sentence: make use of the suffering." So I think in this philosophy, the essence of life is actually in the negativities, is actually in the suffering. And in the suffering lies depression and all the other things, negative emotions and feelings and experiences that we see as human beings on earth. And he doesn't see depression as just a mood. He sees it as a continuous process. And this is a bit different from my earlier statement. But at the same time, it does not in any way say you should medicate for it, right? Another philosopher, Carl Jung, who is like the father of this particular school of thought on handling depression, of this pattern. Carl Jung says in a book, The Practice of Psychotherapy, he says depression is not necessarily pathological. It often foreshadows a renewal of the personality or a burst of creative activity. There are moments in human life when a new page is turned. And so he sees depression as something that forces us to change. And it's a very interesting way to look at it, because in life, most people do not really remember happy moments. Even though you are happy, your happy moments are not the things that you see changed you or really made you grow. Growth comes from trauma. Growth comes from negative experiences. And if you can look at your life and check your history, your life story, you can see that there are various growing points and turning points in your life. Times when you really feel like you graduated from one level to another mentally, in maturity, in experience, in growth. And those things only happen after, negative experiences, after several different kind of, ordeals that you have encountered and overcome. And it is in the overcoming of these adversities that growth comes about, and we can be proud of ourselves in that growth. So we should see depression as something that forces us to change, something that is the depression before the next high, before the next or stable ground, that kind of thing. And if you look at it like that, you are able to stay aware. And one of the things that these philosophers advise is that you remain aware of yourself while you are depressed. So it is important for us to separate your superconscious being from the depression and see the depression as something that is supposed to act on your soul to produce change. And if you see it like that, you can even interact with it. I know it sounds crazy, but this is what people who are smarter than us say. And that way, it doesn't weigh you down. You can investigate your depression. According to Carl Jung, they said the best way to deal with a depression is theologically. Theologically is not the pastor THEO, it is from the word telos, which is like the purpose of your depression. They say every depression has a purpose, and it is now your duty, instead of running away from it, to figure out the purpose of your depression. What does it want you to learn? And if you really follow it down, if you're not a coward and you don't shy away from the scary, let me not say a coward, it is really difficult to deal with depression. If you're not too scared and you muster up enough confidence, you can actually go down the path of investigating your depression. Although one thing to note, according to Carl Jung in his book, Letters of C.O. Young, he says there is an instinct either to back out of depression or to go down to the depth, but no half measures and no half-heartedness. So if you are depressed, you can do two things. You can try to fight it and try to back out of it or snap out of it, like I said earlier, or you can actually go down the depths of your depression and investigate it and find out what it is. And the advised method is to go down the depths of your depression, go down to the barest minimum and know exactly what is happening. Differentiate your depression so you can stay self-aware, and then ride with it downwards and see exactly what it wants from you. By riding with it downward, it actually means a lot of things. It means there are things that your depressions will give you an urge to do, all right? But you should try to be self-aware enough not to do things that will damage you permanently, or or seriously. But you will go low if it is being violent in times when you are not often violent. There are certain type of thoughts you have to engage in, certain types of activities you have to engage in that you would consider low on a normal day. But because of your depression, you are allowed to investigate it to that extent while keeping your self-awareness to the point where you know it does not control you, but you are letting it guide you. And then if you get to those depths, you'll be surprised that you might find parts of yourself that you had forgotten, because the teleos or the purpose of a depression always exists. And sometimes it is, well, most times it is to rejuvenate something inside you. It is for you to die or to kill the old self and to bring out something new in you. And unfortunately, most people never really get to this stage where they get that rebirth. But here's an example that to show that it works. In your life, if there's anything that you've ever overcome, were you better or worse after that? Because the phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, didn't just come out of nowhere. If you've been through something and it did not kill you, even if it made you depressed, if you got out of it, you got out of it smarter or better, or even with a better quality of life until you slip into the next depression, because life is ups and downs generally. But you realize that beating your depression, going through it and beating it and coming out actually makes you a better person than wallowing in it and wallowing in self-pity. Because one thing I need to chip in here is that nobody cares about you more than you. Maybe your parents, and that's just about it. I do not care for you more than you care for yourself. Nobody cares for me more than I care for myself. And if you are going to be depressed, you expect your members of your family or your friends to care about you, and they do not. And it's not their fault. It's not an indictment on their part. It is the fact that this is how life is, and you have to pick up yourself to be able to continue in this race of life instead of feeling sorry for yourself, because nobody's going to live their own race of life and try to focus on picking you up. And this entire thing is about picking you up generally. So our depression can be used as fuel for our future endeavors, as fuel for the things that we are supposed to do, for what our purpose is in life. A lot of the time we are in circular motion. There's something my girlfriend told me about my astrology and said something about you are in a loop and you're supposed to break out of this loop according to my birth chart. And I'm not too good at astrology, but I'm learning the thing. But according to my birth chart, so sometimes the growth and the advancement that you are supposed to actually have in your life would have to come after you've beaten a certain stint of depression. So let us not see it as something negative and see it as something that we can actually use. And in another of his books, Carl Jung says that when a fit of depression comes upon him, he must no longer force himself to do some kind of work in order to forget, but he must accept his depression and give it a hearing. Like, consider the mood that you are in, consider the state that you're in. And this is especially in terms of depression that comes as a result of activity or certain occurrence in our lives, certain depressing occurrences. So don't just try to snap out of it or get over it immediately. Investigate it, hear it out. Talking about how trauma can lead to depression, we no longer do rites of passage. With time and age, people lose interest in the things that they used to find exciting before, and those kind of changes also lead you hear of midlife crisis. It is not really that there's a crisis happening. It is just the fact that when you are in your 40s and 50s, you're not quite sure if you're that old person or still a young boy. You might feel fresh and young, but you're not really relating to the things that are trending. And midlife crisis is basically that confusion about where you stand in life and how to act and what to behave and what is the next stage. Am I ready for a certain kind of move? Should I leave all this childishness behind me? But it is fun. It is that confusion that causes what we know as midlife crisis, according to the philosophers and psychologists and psychotherapists that I've been researching. So, to explain this point, Carl Jung says in The Structure and Dynamic of the Psyche that we see that in this phase of life between 35 and 40, an important change in the human psyche is in preparation. Once previous inclinations and interests begin to weaken and others take their place. So it is that you are having new responsibilities, new inklings, new likes, new activities that you really want to engage in, and then the old ones are losing its value. And it's like somebody that you love but has to go. There's a feeling of loss you feel. You still miss that person, but they have to go. It is what it is. So you can feel bad about it. And then there's also the nervousness of the new things that you have to encounter and you have to tackle. So this is exactly what Carl Jung has said in this particular passage now. And then the earliest forms of depression most people face is the one that comes from heartbreak. at least in the modern times, the one that comes from heartbreak, that comes from, certain things that happened while we are in our lives here, in our youth, sorry, is what I meant to say. But in the earlier days, at least for the male child, there was a rite to passage that we always had to go through. And that was intentional trauma that children of between 10 to 14 years have to go through. It is extremely important in the lives of young men and in the lives of young people to go through a certain type of controlled trauma to be able to teach them exactly how to deal with it in the future when the one that is not controlled comes upon them. And we used to do this in the villages and in the olden days, and different cultures had this rite of passage thing where they would take the young ones and with the older men and they would take them to the bush and they would starve them, they will have them hunt, they will have them kill things, they will have them go through a lot of excruciating things. And when they come back, you can even tell their mothers and their sisters will look at these young men and they can tell that they've been through something. And they are men now. You can see it in their eyes. And these days, there's no such thing anymore. And there's nothing to really trick the mind into that maturity or change in state. Because if a child goes into the wilderness with the older ones to go and perform this ritual of rite of passage, when he has gone through the pains of hunting and hunger and starvation and captivity, when he comes back, playing with tire doesn't really he will know that there's more to life. Just somehow in your psyche, it occurs to you that there's more to life than playing with tire, than playing with sand, than doing all these things. And when the physical life, when in our world now, in the modern times, there is nothing and there is no rite of passage, nothing to really put you through that process, to put your mental through that process. There is an inner force that kind of forces you because we are human beings, and maybe before we are living very true to our instinct and to our inclinations before. But now that the world is kind of totalitarian and everybody knows what they are supposed to do, and there is a system that has chosen all your life activities for you, it is difficult to actually go through this process the way you are supposed to. So, because you fail to go through depression the way you're supposed to or in the controlled manner, your body forces you when it is time for a change, forces you to actually change by putting you in depression. And then when you investigate a depression, you might find out something. You might have this artistic talent that you've not been able to tap into or you forgot since you were small. And then all of a sudden, nothing bad happened though. It's not as if anybody died or anything. You just started feeling this emptiness and this feeling of depression. That is the one that people like to diagnose and call clinical depression and try to give you antidepressants and different drugs for because they say it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. It is something in your belly that needs you to transform to another kind of being. It doesn't mean you need to change your location or you need to leave your current partner or leave your family or something, but there is something about your life that you are not fulfilling that you need to fulfill. And when you investigate the telos of your depression, you will be able to find it out. I'm going to close with this. I'm going to close with this quote from James Hollis in his book titled Swamplands of the Soul. He says, in every case, one has to ask the fundamental question: what is the meaning of my depression? The well with no bottom always has a bottom. We just have to swim down to where it is. You have to swim down there to see it. And so go down with it carefully, with awareness. It is not necessarily a very bad thing. It is a dark energy that can fill your soul, but often it is for the best. And if you're armed with this knowledge, hopefully your next fit of depression, which is inevitably coming, you can use this method to get out of it, share with your loved ones as well, and you can have a better life and actually have good living as young African adults. Thank you very much for sticking with us throughout this season. Remember our sponsors, they've been running throughout the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check out our other content, and we'll see you next season. So I'm going to do a special shout out to a few special people. People who share the podcast on WhatsApp, on your various social media platforms. I see you, I appreciate you. I wish I could call everybody's name, but I don't want to call some and leave some out. But you know yourself, and the others know what they do. It's for the love, and I appreciate it. And everyone who has joined the WhatsApp channel, I appreciate you. There's like 63 of us there. I'd like us to increase that number, but I appreciate every single person on the WhatsApp channel, and I'll never forget you. You're a day one, you're a real one. And that's all for this episode. See you next time.